Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Cristina Mislan. She's an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism. Hi, Cristina.
Hello, Sonali.
Hundreds of migrants are feared dead after a boat carrying 600 people capsized off of the coast of Libya this week. The United Nations High Commission on Refugees estimates that about 400 people have been rescued and only 25 bodies recovered so far. The fishing boat in question was packed to the brim with refugees desperate to escape to Europe, but they encountered poor weather. Reports say that an Irish ship picked up a distress call, and when it pulled up alongside the boat, those on board gathered on one side and the boat tipped over. This year alone, about 2,000 people have been estimated to have died in the Mediterranean Sea while attempting to cross into Europe. Cristina, European leaders gather every time there is a horrific death toll like this, but are they really addressing, when they gather, the root causes of what is driving such desperation?
Well, I believe earlier this summer when the UN finally released a report about the consequences of migration. And what they reported is something many anti-war activists have been underscoring, and that's the consequences of the Western-led wars in the Middle East. And so just as in the United States, the millions of people who die crossing borders almost always tie back to Western intervention of those countries where people are migrating from. And so if we do want to find a solution to the migration problem, then officials have to start looking at their own policies.
And today is the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, a historic piece of legislation that was one of the hard-won victories of the civil rights movement. Later today, President Obama plans to address the nation in a video conference to mark the anniversary. He will speak alongside Attorney General Loretta Lynch and Representative John Lewis. Mr. Lewis was a prominent figure in the fight for voting rights. A federal appeals panel yesterday struck down a controversial Texas voter ID law, saying that it was discriminatory against people of color. That law and several others gained steam after the Supreme Court in 2013 ruled against a major section of the Voting Rights Act that helped to enforce the right to vote. Texas's law is one of the strictest in the nation. Cristina, how important is it for President Obama to directly address the issue of voting rights, especially just hours before the first Republican presidential debate today?
Sure, and it's very important that he's giving the anniversary. But, it's also important in the wake of many conversations that this nation has had in the past few years regarding racial and economic injustice. And so there are also other factors that need to be considered. Some weeks ago, we spoke about the issue of politicians gerrymandering districts. Many activists and scholars have also spoken about the issue of disenfranchisement, where hundreds of people are not even able to vote because of a charge they might have on their record, and that's including minor ones. And so while I think Obama's address is going to be extremely important, particularly because it's going to be and kind of directly targeted toward the Republican candidates, I also think we should be mindful of the various oppressive strategies that Republicans have employed that include but extend beyond voter ID laws. So it'd be nice if President Obama included those as well.
And by the way, on tomorrow's show, we'll speak with Ari Berman about his brand new book, Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. And finally, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Virginia ruled yesterday, narrowly, against law enforcement's warrantless tracking of cell phones. According to The Intercept, the ruling court rejected the third-party doctrine, which is a legal theory that private information held by a company is not protected by the Fourth Amendment prohibitions against unreasonable search and seizure. Two appeals courts previously upheld the right of police to track suspects using their cell phone data without obtaining a warrant. But according to yesterday's ruling, the prevailing judges wrote, quote, "We cannot accept the proposition that cell phone users volunteer to convey their location information simply by choosing to activate and use their cell phones and to carry the devices on their person." Privacy advocates are celebrating but are bracing themselves for a Supreme Court hearing on the case, which is looking quite likely. Cristina, how important is this ruling, given particularly how widely used cell phones are in our society today?
Right. It's extremely important that the ruling acknowledges the wide use of cell phones to illustrate that people shouldn't have to give up their civil rights just to use something that's central to their everyday communication. But I do think, however, it's important to discuss really the lack of privacy in today's political structure. And I think what the public does have to be aware of is that, for instance, the use of social media and many other technologies, that's including cell phones, there's an illusion of privacy that doesn't really exist. And so now that isn't that we use these technologies, so we have to give up our civil rights. Obviously, we should not. There shouldn't be an ultimatum, right? There shouldn't be either use it or give up your rights or don't use it, right? But what it really highlights is the state's ability and willingness to take advantage of these technologies for the purposes of surveilling us. And so I do think we have to be aware of the surveillance state and how it will shape our everyday use of technology. So in many ways, we should be hyper aware of everything we do with today's technologies. And of course, that's including cell phones.
Cristina Mislan, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Cristina Mislan is an assistant professor of journalism studies at the Missouri School of Journalism, and she's our daily Newsflash guest expert. We will be right back after this break.